What is up, guys? It's your boy Metakakis, and today Bungie just released a brand new article going over changes to abilities and armor coming next season within Season 22. So we've got a lot of changes, some big buffs, and some big nerfs, and so let's get started with the exotic armor. So first of all, for the hunters, we have the Knucklehead Radar. The functionality of the Foe Tracer exotic helmet has been completely removed from that exotic and added to the Knucklehead Radar on top of its existing benefits. So they literally smashed Foe Tracer into the Knucklehead, and so for the Foe Tracer exotic, obviously that's got to change now, we took some cues from the popular monochromatic Maestro artifact perk for this one. When you deal damage with one of your abilities, you gain a damage bonus with weapons that have damage types matching your subclass damage type. Additionally, when you defeat an enemy you've damaged with one of your abilities, either with another ability or with a weapon with a damage type matching your subclass type, you will spawn one of the collectible objects associated with your subclass, such as ionic traces or fire sprites. That does sound like a pretty good enabler for a lot of different builds, an easy way to get armor charge. Now moving on from there, we have the Lucky Raspberry. So this exotic was a little too unreliable in its current form, so we've taken a crack at streamlining its energy gains, while leaving some of its benefits intact. The exotic still expands the chaining capabilities of arc bolt grenades, but now instead of basing the grenade energy gains on those chains, each time you damage an enemy with the lightning strikes from the jolted condition, as well as each time you pick up an ionic trace, you gain additional grenade energy. We've also given this grenade the intrinsic ability to stun overload champions. Now you don't have to jolt them and trigger the jolting lightning strikes just to stun them, making these grenades a more reliable tool against overload champions. Well, certainly for running solo lost sectors, that could be very useful. And lastly, for the renewal grasps, we've undone the previous nerf to Duskfield grenade cooldowns when using this exotic. Wow! So for those who don't know, like, renewal grasps were actually like meta, even in PvE, because they provide damage resistance. But Bungie had a nerf where they massively increased the cooldown. Now that that's being removed, honestly, renewal grasps could be pretty lit. Now moving on from there, guys, we have the Titan exotic armor getting buffed. So first of all, for the Icefall Mantle and the Doomfang Pauldrons and the Path of Burning Steps and the Eternal Warrior, Bungie says Season 21 included some changes to Eternal Warrior and Path of the Burning Steps. We added escalating damage bonuses to arc and solar weapons respectively when you get kills with those damage types. We liked that this gave players another way to get surge-like bonuses, but the Eternal Warrior seemed to have the most reliable way to get to the tier 4 damage bonus. We've made some further changes to these perks to make them a little more reliable, while also expanding the functionality to 2 other exotics. Okay, so I assume like Doomfang and maybe Ice Mantle will now ramp up in damage when you get kills with their respective element of weapon. I kind of wish they would have expanded further on this, but it is what it is. Moving on from there, the ACD/0 feedback fence, baby. Bungie says this exotic got a complete mechanical rework and now ties into the armor charge system, increasing its versatility and making it more useful in scenarios where you might not be taking a lot of melee damage. With the new perk, which completely replaces the old, when melee hits give you an armor charge, you take reduced melee damage while you have that armor charge. Taking melee damage causes you to emit a burst of damaging arc energy that jolts targets, consuming your armor charge and dealing more damage based on the number of stacks of armor charge consumed. Note that the damage dealt by the burst of arc energy should be comparable to its current damage for 0 to 3 stacks of armor charge. So Zur actually sold a cracked feedback fence not too long ago, I think even last week, and I was saying, hey, get it just in case they buff it. Well, here's the buff, guys. It doesn't sound absolutely insane, but certainly this does sound like an improvement over the old version. Now, moving on from there, guys, we have the Hallowfire Heart. This exotic often stands in the shadow of the more ubiquitous Heart of Inmost Light. To remedy that, we've removed its base energy 2 solar abilities and replaced it with a perk that will let you build more into sunspots. We think you'll be seeing many more sunspots on the battlefield as a result. As for the perk that greatly increases your ability regen rate when your super is fully charged, we left that as is. So interesting, again, they don't really go into specifics, but it'll now improve sunspots while apparently still having the increased ability regen when you have a full super. So that seems pretty good. Moving on from there, guys, to the Warlock exotic armor. First of all, the Astrocyte Verse. We've added 2 more pieces of functionality to this exotic. When you blink, the enemies near you when you reappear will be volatile. You can then leap away, triggering a series of explosions when you fire upon them. Additionally, when you're using the Nova Warp Super, the Dark Blink ability no longer consumes super energy if you're using this exotic. Very cool. Then, the Geomeg Stabilizers. We've often heard calls to restore the perk that let you top off your super energy by sprinting. The legacy of that incentive still creates some pretty silly play patterns. Instead, we wanted to give players a way to get more super energy no matter how charged their super is. Now, picking up an Ionic Trace while wearing this exotic will grant Guardians additional super energy. That's actually pretty good because you can really kind of spec and cater your build into making a ton of Ionic Traces. Moving on from there, for the Wings of Sacred Dawn. Leaning into the orbital weapons platform fantasy, we wanted to help players have a way to stay aloft longer, especially in target-rich PvE environments. Typically, reloading was the main cause for the float to end. This exotic now automatically reloads solar weapons, including the weapon you are holding, from reserves each time you get a kill while aiming down sights. Try this with the Xenophage. Yeah, the Xenophage or a ton of other awesome exotics. I mean, that seems pretty insane. And lastly, we have the Winter's Guile. Due to the nature of the Stasis Warlock's melee ability, this exotic was previously a disappointing choice for that subclass. We've added a new perk to this one specifically for when you are playing your Stasis subclass. Now, combatants encased in your Penumbral Blast melee will automatically shatter after a short delay. That could be pretty interesting. And so, guys, that's it for the changes to exotic armor. Certainly some pretty big sounding buffs, and I'm excited to test these out and make some builds around them. Now, moving on from there, let's talk the abilities changes. So here are the goals for this release from Bungie themselves. There's 4. Number 1, reduce the uptime and potency of barricade abilities, particularly in high-level PvP activities. Number 2, reduce the potency of the Striker Titan in high-level PvP activities, both in neutral game and when supers come up. Number 3, correct the one-size-fits-all nature of suspend in the combat sandbox. And then lastly, rebalance our Strand Fragment suite to bring up some underperforming options and normalize the potency of overperformers. So keeping all that in mind, here are the changes. So for Towering Barricade, the base cooldown has increased from 48 seconds all the way to 70 seconds. And then for all barricades, the maximum health has been reduced from 600 down to 500. Damage resistance versus PvE combatants has increased to compensate for that change. Now, Bungie does say, at this time, we're not extending the Towering Barricade cooldown change to the Bastion variant, which already has a base cooldown time of 100 seconds. However, the maximum health reduction does apply, bringing its effective HP against players from 500 down to 417. Next up, Thunder Crash is getting a nerf. They've increased the base cooldown time from 500 seconds to 556 seconds, matching the majority of our roaming super roster. After that, for Knockout, they've reduced the damage bonus versus players from 50 down to 30. So that's it for the Arc Titans, rip in pepperoni guys, but after that Bungie talks about suspend, saying that suspend is currently like a skeleton key that solves combat problems against all champion types. Its current duration heavily steps on the toes of stasis freeze, and the uptime of suspending atoms doesn't allow for meaningful player decision making when choosing when and where to place a hard disable. And that's all true, like literally you can suspend any champion. You don't have to match the champion type, and you'll get something that suspends them again before the first suspend wears off, and you can just completely disable a lot of champions. So here are the changes. For suspend, they've reduced the base suspend duration versus non-champion PvE combatants from 8 seconds down to 5 seconds. The thread of continuity now extends this duration to 7 seconds, down from 12 seconds. Reduced the base suspend duration versus champion combatants from 8 seconds down to 3 seconds or 4 seconds with thread of continuity. And they've increased the snap damage dealt to suspend boss combatants by 67%. Moving on from there, for Thread of Mind, reduce the class energy gain based on the tier of the defeated target. So minor combatants reduced from 15 down to 10%, major combatants 25% down to 15%, and bosses and champions and mini bosses from 50% down to 25%. Then we have Thread of Generation. Reduce the overall energy gain per damage event against PvE enemies by about 20%, and they've rebalanced the energy gain multiplier across primary weapon archetypes. We wanted to bring the energy gains for dealing damage with precision weapons and fully automatic weapons closer together. Overall, we've reduced the efficiency of fully automatic primary weapons and increased the efficiency of precision primary weapons to compensate. Now moving on from there, guys, they say in combination with the changes to suspend, we want to shift some of that potency to other strand atoms. So for threadlings, they've increased the threadling damage versus PvE combatants by 30%. That's pretty good. For tangles, they've reduced the tangle creation cooldown time from 15 seconds to 12 seconds, so you can have more tangles. And then for sever, PvE combatants affected by sever now have their outgoing damage reduced by 40% instead of 30% currently. Okay, that's a pretty big number. Additionally, they're also addressing feedback on a handful of strand abilities and aspects. So for Silk Strike, they've increased Silk Strike damage resistance from 40% to 45%. They've reduced the suppression time between Silk Strike super air attacks. They've reduced the vertical lift provided by Silk Strike heavy air attack to reduce instances of missing the primary target. And then for Threaded Spectre, increase the Threaded Spectre lifetime from 10 to 12 seconds. They've increased the Threaded Spectre health versus PvE combatants. Threaded Spectre now takes longer to detect nearby PvE combatants at the beginning of its lifetime, and PvE combatants now more consistently focus on Threaded Spectre instead of the Hunter, and allied players no longer have reticle magnetism toward Threaded Spectre. Next up, for the Wanderer aspect, destroying a tangle now creates a delayed suspending detonation, increased suspend detonation radius from 6 to 7 meters against PvE combatants, and increased thrown Wanderer tangle detonation damage to match standard tangle detonations. Then we have changes to the grapple here. Grapple melee always takes priority when active, regardless of whether or not target is within range. All right, interesting. Then we have some more changes here to fragments. So for Thread of Propagation, it now grants plus 10 strength, and then Thread of Continuity no longer grants plus 10 strength. Thread of Wisdom no longer requires a precision kill to activate. That's pretty interesting. Thread of Isolation reduced the number of precision hits required to activate by an average of about 30%, which varies based on the weapon archetype. And then for Thread of Rebirth, the number of created threadlings now increases based on the tier of the defeated target. So minor combatants make 1, elite combatants or players make 2, and boss champions or mini bosses make 3. That's really interesting. And so guys, there you have it for the changes to abilities and exotic armor coming next season. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section down below. Certainly, I'm excited for some of the changes for the exotic armor, like stuff like the Hallowfire, stuff like the Wings of Sacred Dawn. Does sound like they're getting some pretty big buffs. As for the abilities, it's always sad to have stuff nerfed, but especially for Strand, I mean, Bungie is right. You could just suspend lock targets so easily, so it makes sense to tone that down. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That is linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.